All right, class, we're back. We're going to start with video number 2. So the mouth is formed by the cheeks, the hard and soft palates, and the tongue. So here we see a picture of our mouth. The hard palate is the bony portion in the anterior part of the roof of the mouth. The soft palate is in the back. There are fauces, which are the openings between the oral cavity and the oropharynx. The uvula hangs down. Obviously, you guys probably know what cheeks are. The tongue, the lingual frenulum is the connective piece between the tongue and the bottom or below it. That can, if it's attached still, it can cause a tongue-tied problem. We also have the lips and the teeth. Excuse me. So the salivary glands lie outside the mouth and empty their contacts into ducts, which deliver saliva into the oral cavity. There are 3 pairs that you should know: the parotids, the submandibular, and the sublinguals. So here you can see the parotid gland is over at this location. The submandibular is going to be below the mandible. The sublingual is below the tongue. Okay, and you can see there's little ducts, and they're going to release their secretion into the mouth. Now, there's 2 types of cells that do the secretion. We have mucus acini and serous acini. Mucus acini secrete mucus and a very small amount of salivary amylase. Now, throughout this whole lecture and the upcoming lectures, anytime you see ASE at the end of a word, that is an enzyme. So remember, enzymes are molecules that decrease a activation energy needed for a reaction. So we learned that in A&P1. Enzymes basically make a chemical reaction happen, okay? And in our case here, they're going to be making the digestive chemical reactions. So this is a digestive enzyme, salivary amylase. Now the serous acini secretes serous fluid and salivary amylase. So not very much mucus here. The parotids are serous acini. The sublinguals are mostly mucus acini with a few serous. And the submandibular are mostly serous and a few mucus, okay? The saliva lubricates and dissolves foods, and it begins the chemical breakdown of carbohydrates. And that's done with the salivary amylase. It's 99.5% water that dissolves foods so that it can be tasted by our gustatory receptors and digestive reactions begin. Remember that gustation is a chemical type of a sense. So we have chemoreceptors, and chemoreceptors only are activated when something is dissolved in water. Salivary amylase is the enzyme that starts the breakdown of starch, which is a carbohydrate. Chloride ions in saliva activate the salivary amylase. The autonomic nervous system controls salivation. The sympathetic nervous system stops salivary gland secretion, so you get a dry mouth under stress. Parasympathetic nervous system causes the continuous moderate salivation. This helps to keep our mucous membranes moist. The tongue, together with the associated muscles, forms the floor of the oral cavity. It's composed of skeletal muscle covered with mucous membranes. It helps in chewing, swallowing, and speech. The upper and lateral surfaces of the tongue are covered with papillae, some of which contain taste buds. Lingual glands, which are minor salivary glands, secrete what's called lingual lipase. This is inactive until it reaches the acidic environment of the stomach, where it begins lipid digestion. Teeth are accessory digestive organs, and they're located in what's called dental alveoli. These are sockets, like your dental sockets, in the mandible and maxilla. And they are also covered with gingiva, which are gums. Periodontal ligaments secure the teeth for chewing. The external regions, if you look along the left side of this figure, are the crown, the neck, and the root. The outermost surface of the crown is covered with enamel. This is the strongest substance in our body, even stronger than bone. Below the enamel, we have dentin. This makes up the majority of the tooth. There's also this cavity in here, a pulp cavity. This has nerves and blood vessels. There is a cement that is a bone-like substance that attaches the root into the periodontal ligament. And then there's the root canal. So you've probably heard of somebody having a root canal. Well, this is an actual anatomical structure. All right. Now here we list all the different teeth that one develops. So we probably all know that you have baby teeth, and those are also called deciduous teeth. You have a total of 20, this is in an average person, a normal, we're gonna say this is the normal condition, the expected condition. So these are 20 deciduous teeth, and they fall out. And then you get your permanent teeth, which have a total of 32 permanent teeth. They include the wisdom teeth in that count. The wisdom teeth are basically a third molar. Digestion occurs in both a mechanical and a chemical way. So starting in the mouth, the mechanical digestion happens by chewing, which is also known as mastication. Chewing mixes the food with saliva and then forms a bolus, which can easily be swallowed. So food becomes a bolus. Chemical digestion begins with salivary amylase. They convert polysaccharides into disaccharides. So remember, a carbohydrate is often, most of the time, a large one is a polysaccharide. The building blocks of a polysaccharide are monosaccharides. If you have two monosaccharides together, it's a disaccharide. Then you can add more onto that and it becomes a polysaccharide. So our goal is to break it down from polysaccharides down to monosaccharides, which can be used by our body cells. So this salivary amylase breaking down the polysaccharides to monosaccharides is the only chemical digestion occurring in the mouth. Lingual lipase is secreted, but it doesn't start working until that bolus takes it to the stomach, where the stomach has an acidic environment, and that activates the lingual lipase. All right, if you could pause this video now and watch section 3.1 about the mechanical digestion in the GI tract. And then please come back. All right, moving on to the pharynx. Once we swallow food from the mouth, it goes into the pharynx. It is a funnel-shaped tube that extends from the internal nares, which are the inside of our nostrils, to the esophagus posteriorly and to the larynx anteriorly. The pharynx is composed of skeletal muscle and is lined with a mucous membrane. Excuse me. There are three parts to the pharynx. There is the nasopharynx, which is only respiratory. Remember, we learned that in the respiratory system. And then there's the oro and laryngopharynxes, and those have dual functions of the digestive and respiratory systems. For the pharynx, we have the esophagus. This is a collapsible muscular tube that lies posterior to the trachea and connects the pharynx to the stomach. It secretes mucus and it transports the bolus. There's no digestive enzymes and there is no absorption here. Excuse me. Now it has several different cellular layers. There is stratified squamous epithelium. Remember, stratified squamous is many layers of thin flat cells. This allows for protection when the food is traveling down the esophagus. The superior 1/3 of the esophagus's muscular layer is skeletal muscle. The middle third is skeletal and smooth, and the inferior 1/3 is all smooth. So there's a transition of voluntary swallowing down to the involuntary nature of our digestion. So you can see in this picture here, we have the lumen up here, and then we have the stratified squamous epithelium, the submucosa. The muscular layer has the circular layer here and the longitudinal layer. So because we just have smooth muscle, I would garner to say that this is the inferior 1/3 of the esophagus. Now, the superficial layer here is called the adventitia, not the serosa. Here we see a cross-section of the esophagus, and you can see just how muscular and the different folds it has. It's really interesting. So the mucosa, remember that's like all that stratified squamous epithelium. It's really protected, okay? Now there's two sphincters that control the esophagus and the movement of that bolus. The upper esophageal sphincter, or the UES, is made up of skeletal muscle, so that's consciously controlled. It regulates the movement of food from the pharynx into the esophagus. The lower esophageal sphincter, the LES, is made up of smooth muscle, and it regulates the movement of food from the esophagus into the stomach. So you may have heard of GERD, which is gastroesophageal reflux disease. It occurs when the lower esophageal sphincter fails to close adequately after food has entered the stomach. So here we see the esophagus coming down to the stomach, and there's the lower esophageal sphincter, which is made up of smooth muscle. When it doesn't completely close, then the stomach contents can reflux back into the esophagus, and that's when you can get that heartburn. Oh, what happened here? Deglutition is the term for swallowing. So there are 3 stages of deglutition. And the first is the voluntary stage. This is when the bolus of food is forced back to the back of the oral cavity, and then into the oropharynx, and then into, and then that happens by the way of the tongue. So the first is the voluntary stage. Excuse me. The pharyngeal stage is when the bolus is in the oropharynx, and it alerts the deglutition center in our medulla and pons in the brainstem. This causes the closing off of the nasopharynx with the soft palate and the uvula. It closes off the larynx with the epiglottis. The UES relaxes and the bolus moves into the esophagus. So in the voluntary stage, we have the tongue is going to lubricate the food, and it moves it towards the back of the oral cavity. In the pharyngeal stage, the tongue rises. You can see this is the big tongue. It closes, or it rises up against the palate and closes off the nasopharynx. So this was the nasopharynx before. Now the soft palate is closing that off. So we're not going to get food going back up through our nose. Uvula and the palate seal off that. The epiglottis also covers the larynx, so we don't get food going down into our windpipe, okay? So here's the epiglottis. You can see it open at this point, and this would be the larynx is right here. So we close that off with the epiglottis. Food is not going to travel down the larynx. Instead, it's going to go down the esophagus, which is posterior. The third stage of deglutition is swallowing. So this is the esophageal of deglutition is the esophageal stage. In this stage, the bolus moves through the esophagus by peristalsis, which is the coordinated contractions of the circular and longitudinal muscles. So one contracts, the other one relaxes, and the other one contracts, and the previous one relaxes. So by doing this alternation, it propels the food through the esophagus. Mucus in the esophageal glands lubricate and reduces the friction as this occurs. Then the lower esophageal sphincter relaxes and it allows the bolus to move into the stomach. Okay. So if you could pause the video now and watch this same animation, but do section 4.1. And this is the end of part 2.